I'm Emily, 32, and at my own brother's lavish engagement party in a room filled with everyone we've ever known, he held up a glass and introduced me as the family failure. Before I tell you how a single word from my mouth brought that entire party to a screeching halt, drained the color from his fiancée's face, and changed my family forever, do me a quick favor. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who's out there listening to these crazy life stories. The party was pure Jason, ostentatious, loud, and meticulously designed to scream, "I've made it." He'd rented out a top-floor venue in a downtown skyscraper, a place with panoramic views of the city lights where the air itself seemed to cost money. The waiters moved with a silent, judgmental grace, and the clinking of champagne flutes was the dominant soundtrack. Jason, my brother, 3 years my senior, was the sun around which our family had always orbited. He worked in high-stakes finance, drove a German sports car, and possessed an unshakable confidence that often bled into arrogance. His fiancée, Sophia, was his perfect match, a fiercely intelligent corporate lawyer whose smile was as sharp and polished as the diamonds on her hand. They were a power couple, and this engagement party was less a celebration of love and more a declaration of their joint victory in life. And my role in this grand spectacle? I was the unpaid help, the bartender. "Emily, you're a lifesaver," Jason had clapped me on the back a few days before, his tone suggesting he was bestowing a great honor upon me. "The caterers charge a fortune for a dedicated bartender. You can handle it, right? Just keep the drinks flowing. It'll be a huge help." He didn't ask. He informed me. It was a transaction where my time and dignity were the currency. So there I stood behind a long, linen-draped table, lined with bottles of premium liquor and buckets of ice, wearing a crisp shirt and slacks that felt more like a uniform with each passing minute. I served $100 champagne to Jason's friends, men who talked loudly about stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons. They looked past me, through me, their eyes scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Then I saw him, David, my ex-boyfriend. He was standing with his wife, Mia, one of Jason's closest and most obnoxious friends. David and I had been serious once, for 3 years. He'd left me because, in his words, I lacked ambition. He needed a partner who was going places. Apparently, Mia and her designer heels were going places. He caught my eye and gave me a small, tight smile. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a look of confirmation, a self-satisfied glance that said, "See, I was right about you. Still serving drinks while the rest of us run the world." The old familiar ache of that breakup flared up, a dull throb of humiliation. I was busy trying to ignore it when the tapping of a glass silenced the room. Jason, glowing under the spotlight, began his toast. He was a natural performer, charming and abusive. He thanked Sophia's parents for raising such a brilliant woman. He thanked our parents for their bottomless support and for always believing in him. And then he turned, a wide grin spreading across his face, and gestured with his glass directly at me. "And I have to give a very special shout-out to my little sister Emily," he boomed, his voice dripping with condescending affection, "for graciously volunteering to man the bar tonight. She's got a lot of experience with, paperwork and answering phones down at the courthouse, so this kind of service role is right up her alley. Let's hear it for her." A smattering of polite, confused applause broke out. A few of Jason's friends snickered into their drinks. I saw my mother's face tighten into a pained, forced smile. My father simply took a long, slow sip of his scotch, his eyes fixed on the far wall. The heat rose in my face, a burning wave of pure shame. I grabbed a clean glass and began polishing it with a cloth, focusing on the repetitive motion, my knuckles turning white. After the speech, as the chatter resumed, my mother's friend Patty drifted over. She was a kind, gentle soul, utterly oblivious to the undercurrents of cruelty in my family. "That was just a lovely toast, dear," she said, beaming. "It's so wonderful that you're here helping your brother out. He must be so proud." She leaned in conspiratorially. "So, what is it you do down at the courthouse exactly, Emily? Your mother is always so vague about it." The world seemed to slow down. This was the moment, the precipice. I could do what I always did. I could give the vague, non-committal answer, mumble administration or office work. I could swallow this humiliation just as I had swallowed 1,000 others. I could keep the peace. I could be the glue. But as I looked up, I saw Jason watching me. a smug, triumphant look on his face. He was waiting for me to squirm. I saw Sophia standing beside him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. I saw David whispering to Mia, both of them glancing over at me with pity. And something inside me, a part of me that I thought had died long ago from neglect, refused. It refused to be small for one more second. I set the glass down on the table. The sound was a soft, definitive click. I straightened up, pulling my shoulders back. I let my eyes sweep past Patty, past Jason, and I locked my gaze directly onto the cool, intelligent eyes of his fiancé, the corporate lawyer, and in a voice that was not loud, but was so clear and resonant that it sliced through the ambient noise of the party, I said the one word that would bring it all crashing down. Judge. The silence that fell was not empty. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered every other sound in the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter choked in people's throats. The smug grin on Jason's face froze, then melted into a slack-jawed confusion. Patty's kindly smile faltered, her eyes wide with bewilderment. And Sophia's reaction was the one that mattered. All the color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of ash. Her professionally poised demeanor shattered. The expensive champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the floor, a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of a spell. Her perfectly painted red lips parted, and she stared at me, her mind clearly racing, connecting dots I never knew she could see. She mouthed a single, almost inaudible word, a question filled with a horror that was uniquely her own. Judge? That one word, judge, hung in the air, vibrating with years of unspoken truth. To understand the depth of that moment, to grasp why I, a woman of the law, had allowed such a fundamental falsehood about my own life to persist, you need to go back 10 years. You need to understand the promise I made in the sterile, antiseptic-smelling room of a hospital to the only man who ever bothered to look past the surface, my grandfather. I was 22, on the cusp of starting law school, filled with the kind of nervous excitement that only youth can provide. My grandfather, a man whose quiet strength had been the bedrock of my childhood, was fading. The rest of the family treated his impending death with a sort of brisk, uncomfortable practicality. They gathered in the waiting room, their hushed conversations a mixture of grief, logistics, and quiet jockeying for who would inherit his antique watch. Jason was on his phone, pacing the hallway, his voice a low, intense murmur as he navigated a work crisis. He was present physically, but his mind was elsewhere, already moving on. I was the one who sat by the bed. I held his hand, its skin as thin and dry as old parchment, and watched the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They were clouded with pain, but for a moment they were as sharp and perceptive as ever. "Emily," he rasped, his voice a fragile thread of sound. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to shake his entire frame. "I'm here, Grandpa," I said, leaning closer. "This family," he began, his grip on my hand surprisingly firm. "The house of cards, sweetheart. Your father, your mother, they mean well, but they see what they want to see, and they want to see a star." He paused, gathering his strength. "They've pinned all their hopes, all their vicarious ambition on Jason. He's the face of the family, the golden boy, but he's brittle, Emily. His confidence. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. He needs to be the best. He needs the spotlight to feel whole." I listened, my throat tight with unshed tears. He saw it all so clearly. "They don't see you," he continued, his eyes boring into mine. "They don't see your resilience, your patience, your quiet strength. You're the foundation, Emily. While they're all looking up at the shiny star, you're the one holding the whole damn thing up from below." His voice became urgent, pleading. Promise me you'll be the glue. Don't you be the one to cause a break. Don't be the one to rock the boat. They won't survive it." I was 22, heartbroken, and desperate to honor the man I worshipped. In that moment, his words felt like a sacred duty. What else could I possibly do? "I promise, Grandpa," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I'll be the glue. I promise." A flicker of relief crossed his face. He squeezed my hand one last time and then drifted back into a restless sleep. He passed away 2 days later, and his final words became my life's secret constitution, a promise that shaped the next decade of my life, a weight that I willingly, foolishly chose to carry every single day. The lie about my job was never a single deliberate act of deception. It was a slow, creeping rot of misunderstanding, fertilized by their profound lack of interest. It began when I graduated from law school near the top of my class. At a family dinner, I excitedly told them I'd accepted a position as a prosecutor with the district attorney's office. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," my mother said, her smile bright, but her eyes distant. She was already turning to my brother. "Jason, that's fantastic news about your promotion. Vice president at 30. We have to have a party. It's a big step." I tried to interject, wanting them to understand the significance. "I'll be trying felony cases." "That's nice, dear," my father said, patting my shoulder absently. "Good, steady government work. Great benefits." He then launched into a 20-minute monologue about Jason's new salary, the size of his corner office, and the importance of a well-funded 401k. I tried to correct them, to explain the difference between a prosecutor and a clerk, but my words were like stones tossed into a river, disappearing without a ripple against the powerful current of their admiration for Jason. They had their narrative. Jason was the ambitious, high-flying success story. I was the responsible, quiet, and ultimately unremarkable younger daughter who had found a safe, boring job. My reality didn't fit their pre-written script, so they simply edited it. They didn't hear what they didn't want to hear. And I, remembering my promise to be the glue, let them. It was easier. It avoided conflict. Kept the fragile house of cards from trembling. So I just stopped trying. My silence became my compliance. It became a grim, recurring pattern. Jason would get a 6-figure bonus. My parents would toast him with champagne. I would get a murderer convicted and sentenced to life without parole. My parents would ask if I was still happy with my little office job. At holidays, the disparity was almost comical. For Christmas, Jason received a Rolex. I received a gift card to a department store. The unspoken message was clear. One of us was worth investing in. The other was an afterthought. My Aunt Caroline was perhaps the worst. "Oh, Emily," she would say at family gatherings, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's so nice you have a job with such regular hours. My David, the doctor, he works such crazy shifts. But of course his salary more than makes up for it. I do worry about you, though. Are you managing to save up at all on a clerk's pay?" Each comment was a small, sharp paper cut, and over 10 years, I was covered in them. The only person who saw through the facade was Grandma Eleanor. She was quiet, but her eyes missed nothing. She lived in a small, tidy condo filled with books and memories. About a year after I was formally appointed to the bench, at 29, an achievement that made local news and was a huge topic of conversation in the state's legal community, she invited me over for tea. She didn't mention the appointment at first. She talked about her garden, asked about my apartment, and then she placed a thick, worn scrapbook on the table between us. She opened it. My breath caught in my chest. It was filled with me. There was a clipping from the local paper with a small headline, "E. Matthews appointed youngest Superior Court judge in 50 years. There was a printout from a legal blog analyzing a complex ruling I had written. There was a photo of me shaking hands with the governor at my swearing-in ceremony, a ceremony my parents and brother hadn't attended because Jason had a can't-miss golf tournament that weekend. "I see everything, Emily," she said softly, her finger gently tracing the edge of the newspaper clipping. "And I know why you're so quiet about it all. You're a good girl. You're keeping your promise to your grandfather." Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back welled in my eyes. The immense relief of being truly seen, of having my silent struggle acknowledged, was overwhelming. "Grandma," I started, but my voice broke. "He would be so proud he would burst," she said, her voice fierce. "But he would never, ever want you to carry a weight that was crushing your own spirit. A promise isn't meant to be a prison. Remember that. Every burden, no matter how noble, needs to be set down eventually." I should have listened, but I didn't. I thought my shoulders were broad enough. I thought being the glue was a noble sacrifice. My professional life was a different universe. In my courtroom, I was Judge Matthews. I commanded a room. Seasoned lawyers, men and women twice my age, addressed me as Your Honor and deferred to my judgment. I presided over everything from bitter custody battles to complex corporate litigation. The weight of people's lives and fortunes rested on my decisions. It was a responsibility that humbled me daily. My colleagues, like Judge Rachel, a sharp, witty woman in her 60s, who had taken me under her wing, were my real family in many ways. She knew about my family's misunderstanding. Let me get this straight, she had said over lunch one day, her fork hovering midair. You sentence people to prison. You approve multi-million-dollar settlements. You are literally a robed figure of justice. And your family thinks you file TPS reports? Something like that, I'd admitted, shamefaced. Emily, honey, she'd said, putting her fork down. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a conscious act of willful ignorance. The truth isn't a puppy you can keep in a box. It's a lion. And sooner or later, that lion is going to roar. I thought I could keep the lion caged. I thought I was in control. But at my brother's engagement party, standing there under the weight of his public mockery and my ex-boyfriend's pity, I finally understood. The cage was breaking. The promise had become a prison. And the lion was about to roar. The silence in that room was the sound of the cage door swinging open. And my brother's furious, disbelieving voice was the first sound of the chaos to come. What the hell are you talking about, Emily? Jason's voice, sharp with a mixture of rage and genuine confusion, shattered the spell. He stormed toward me, his handsome face contorted into an ugly mask of fury. This is my engagement party. My night. What kind of sick, twisted joke is this? Do you think this is funny? His voice was rising, cracking with disbelief. My father, his face ashen, was right behind him. Emily, that's enough, he commanded, his voice a low, threatening growl. You're making a scene. Whatever game you're playing, it's over. Apologize to your brother and let's put an end to this. Apologize? The word seemed absurd. Apologize for what? For finally telling the truth? For refusing to be their punchline anymore? I looked at my father, the man who had never once shown the slightest curiosity about a third of my life. I looked at my mother, fluttering her hands nervously. Her primary concern was not the truth, but the potential for social embarrassment. The lifelong habit of deference, the instinct to retreat and smooth things over to keep the peace, had vanished. It was replaced by a cold, unshakable resolve. I'm not joking, Jason, I said, my voice as calm and steady as if I were addressing a courtroom. And I have absolutely nothing to apologize for. You're not a judge, he spat, his voice escalating into a near shout. He was so invested in his version of me that my reality was, to him, an impossibility. You answer phones. You push paper. I know what you do. You think you can stand here and lie to my fiancé, to my friends, to our whole family, just to get some pathetic scrap of attention? The scene was becoming a spectacle. The party guests had formed a half circle around us, their faces a mixture of fascination, discomfort, and morbid curiosity. They were witnessing the live implosion of a family. Sophia stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock, darting between me and Jason. My ex-boyfriend David was whispering frantically to Mia, his mouth slightly agape, the pity on his face having been replaced by something that looked like horrified awe. This was the critical moment. I could see the narrative they were trying to weave in real time. I was the unstable younger sister, jealous of the golden child's success, having a public breakdown. My father's stern expression and my mother's tears would be the proof. They would paint me as delusional to avoid confronting their own complicity. And then another voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority. I don't think she's kidding. Every head swiveled. The voice belonged to Marcus, one of Jason's friends from his inner circle. Marcus was a young, ambitious associate at a prestigious downtown law firm. He was usually just part of the background, another face in Jason's adoring entourage. Now he stood there looking profoundly uncomfortable, like a man forced to choose between his loyalty and the truth. Jason rounded on him, his eyes blazing. Marcus, what did you say? Stay out of this. Jason, man, I can't, Marcus stammered, swallowing hard. He wouldn't look at me, keeping his eyes fixed on my brother, as if pleading with him to understand. I was in court last week, at the Maine County Courthouse, for a preliminary hearing on that big merger case. He took a half step forward, gesturing tentatively in my direction. She was presiding, up on the bench, in the robe, the whole thing. Jason, that's Judge Matthews. He hesitated, his voice growing smaller. She's kind of a legend with the Junior Bar Associates. She got her appointment before she was 30. We all know who she is. If my one-word statement had been a grenade, Marcus's reluctant, detailed testimony was a targeted drone airstrike. It didn't come from a stranger. It came from one of their own, a lawyer, a professional who understood the world of the courthouse, a world my family had never bothered to learn about. His words were irrefutable. The color drained from Jason's face. He stared at Marcus, his expression one of pure, unadulterated betrayal. It was as if his own soldier had just turned his weapon on him. The fear that had flickered in his eyes before now bloomed into full-blown panic. His entire reality, a carefully curated world where he was the undisputed king, had just been demolished by a few sentences from his own friend. My parents were completely floored. My father's mouth hung open, his face a comical picture of disbelief. My mother looked back and forth between me and Jason, her mind clearly unable to process this new, impossible information. My Aunt Caroline and Uncle Robert, who had been whispering venomously just moments before, now looked like they were trying to merge with the wallpaper. A profound sense of calm washed over me. The storm had broken, and I was the eye. I was the one left standing. I decided in that moment to not just state the fact, but to deliver the reason. This wasn't just about my job. It was about the lie we had all been living. I kept quiet because of a promise I made to Grandpa on his deathbed, I said, my voice resonating in the stunned silence of the room. Every eye was on me. I promised him I would be the glue. I promised him I would do whatever it took to keep this family from breaking apart over petty egos and perceived slights. I chose to carry that weight for him. I let my gaze travel from my father to my mother and finally lock onto Jason. I let you all believe what you wanted to believe because I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was keeping the peace. I let you have your golden child, I said, looking directly at my brother, because your ego was more fragile than my dignity. But I was wrong. Peace at the cost of respect isn't peace at all. It's a quiet, suffocating cage. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. My voice dropped, becoming more personal, more direct. You didn't want the truth, Jason, so I gave you my silence. A silence I kept for 10 years, out of love and respect for a dying man's wish. You can't be angry with me, now that the silence has finally ended. You're the one who broke it. You broke it when you stood up there and used me as a punchline to make yourself feel tall. With a finality that felt liberating, I reached down, untied the strings of the bartender's apron I was still wearing, and folded it neatly. I placed it on the bar, a symbolic shedding of the role they had assigned to me. I gave Marcus a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of his courage. It had cost him something to speak up, and I knew it. Then I turned my back on all of it. I walked through the sea of stunned, whispering guests, past my speechless family, past the wreckage of my brother's perfect night. I walked out of the venue into the cool, indifferent air of the city, and I didn't look back. I didn't know what would happen next, what new configuration our broken family would take, but I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, nothing would ever be the same again. The glue had come undone, and I was finally free. The walk back to my apartment was a blur. The city's symphony of sirens and traffic was a distant hum. My mind was a chaotic replay of the last hour, the shock on their faces, the satisfaction, the guilt. Had I done the right thing? Had I detonated a bomb in the center of my family out of pure, selfish pride? My phone began to vibrate relentlessly in my pocket. Jason, my mother, my father, Jason again. A cascade of desperate attempts to pull me back into the chaos. I ignored them all, letting the calls go to voicemail. When I finally stepped into the clean, quiet space of my apartment, I felt like a soldier returning from a long war. I poured a glass of cold water, my hand shaking almost imperceptibly. I stood at my floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the endless grid of city lights, a universe of stories playing out in the buildings below. This was my life, the one I had built for myself in the shadows of their neglect. I had a career that gave me purpose, a home that was my sanctuary, the respect of my peers. Why had I allowed the opinion of people who refused to see me to hold so much power for so long? My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs. And we need to talk, Sophia. Of course. The fiancée, the high-powered lawyer. She was the biggest variable, the one piece on the chessboard I couldn't predict. Her reaction, her next move, would determine the next phase of this war. I was tempted to ignore it, to shut out the world for one night and just breathe. But I knew I couldn't. The storm wasn't over. It had just followed me home. With a deep breath, I typed a simple reply. When and where? Her response was instantaneous, clinical. Your office, Monday, 9:00 a.m. I'll clear my schedule. My office, my chambers, the place where the name on the door was Judge E. Matthews. My territory. the ground where I held all the power. It was a calculated move, and I couldn't tell if it was an act of aggression or one of complete surrender. Just as I set the phone down, one last text came through. It was from Grandma Eleanor. The truth is a heavy burden to carry, Emily, but a lie is a heavier one to live under. I am so very proud of you tonight. I read her words, and a wave of warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the cold, not of guilt, but of loneliness. Maybe I hadn't destroyed my family. Maybe I had just given us all our first terrifying chance to finally be honest. The weekend passed in a self-imposed exile. I silenced my phone, creating a small, fortified island of peace amidst the hurricane of frantic calls and accusatory texts. I could picture the scene at my parents' house with perfect clarity. A family council of war with Jason pacing, my mother crying, and my father trying to formulate a strategy to contain the damage. Their entire reality had been upended, and I knew instinctively that their first move would be to frame me as the aggressor. Emily's jealous. Emily's unstable. Emily lied to us for years. They had to make me the villain of the story, because the alternative, confronting their own profound, decades-long neglect, was a truth too painful to bear. I tried to anchor myself in the mundane. I went for a long run along the river, pushing my body until my lungs burned, trying to outrun the turmoil in my head. I went to the grocery store and bought food I didn't feel like eating. I sat in my quiet, minimalist apartment and tried to read a book, but the words just swam on the page. Hovering over it all was the impending meeting with Sophia. She was the one person in this drama who operated on the same plane as I did. She was a lawyer. She dealt in facts, evidence, and consequences. She couldn't be swayed by my family's emotional manipulations. Her verdict on the situation would be cold, logical, and I suspected, final. Monday morning, walking through the marble halls of the courthouse, I felt the familiar transformation. The heavy, messy cloak of family drama began to slip from my shoulders, replaced by the weighty, familiar robes of my profession. In this building, I wasn't Emily, the problematic younger sister. I was Judge Matthews. The bailiffs nodded respectfully. "Morning, Your Honor." The court clerks greeted me with a professional deference. This was my world, a world built on order and reason, a world I had earned. At precisely 9:02, my judicial assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your Honor, a Miss Sophia Rossi is here to see you." "Send her in, Maria," I said, my voice betraying none of the tension coiling in my stomach. Sophia entered my chambers. She was a completely different person from the glamorous fiancée at the party. The celebratory sparkle was gone, replaced by a severe, almost martial aura. She wore a tailored, charcoal gray power suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight, immaculate bun. She carried a sleek leather briefcase, holding it not like a purse, but like a shield. She looked as though she were walking into a hostile negotiation, not a personal meeting. "Judge Matthews," she said, her voice crisp and formal, "thank you for seeing me on such short notice." She remained standing until I gestured to one of the leather chairs opposite my large mahogany desk. "Sophia," I replied, deliberately using her first name to push back against the formality, "you said you needed to talk." She sat, her posture perfect, her hands clasped on top of her briefcase. She took a deep, controlled breath, the kind one takes before delivering a difficult closing argument. "First," she began, "I need to offer you my profound apology for Jason's behavior at the party. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and utterly inexcusable." "That's his apology to make, not yours," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "No," she countered, shaking her head sharply. "It is mine to make as well, because I knew." I felt my eyebrows raise slightly. I leaned forward. "You knew what exactly?" "I suspected," she corrected herself, the lawyer in her demanding precision. "When Jason first mentioned years ago that his sister Emily worked at the courthouse, I filed it away as a piece of trivia. But when we were addressing the engagement invitations, I saw your full name, Emily Matthews, E. Matthews." She paused, her gaze intense. "It rang a bell, a very loud, very expensive bell, for my firm." I remained silent, letting her continue. "Judge E. Matthews," she said, the name sounding foreign in her mouth. "I remembered the name from the Pharmatech class action ruling last year. It was a massive case for our firm. I wasn't lead counsel, but I was on the support team. We all were. The case was a bloodbath for our client. The loss was significant." "I remember the case," I said dryly. I'm sure you do, she replied, a flicker of a wry smile on her lips. After seeing the invitation, I did a search. Public records. Took me all of 5 minutes. I saw your picture. I saw your judicial appointment records. I knew who you were. The confession hung in the air between us, stark and damning. So you knew who I was long before the party? Yes, she admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The professional mask cracked, revealing a deep well of shame beneath. I knew, and I said nothing. I played dumb. I walked into that party knowing my fiancé was about to publicly belittle a woman I knew to be a superior court judge. Her voice trembled with self-disgust. How do you even begin that conversation? Honey, you know your sister? The one you treat like the village idiot? Well, she happens to be the same judge who cost one of my firm's biggest clients a $5 million lawsuit and wrote an opinion that will be taught in law schools as a master class in dismantling corporate malfeasance. She looked down at her hands, which were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. So I did what was easy. I did what was cowardly. I stayed silent. I told myself I was mistaken. I chose to believe Jason's ridiculous, comfortable narrative because the truth was too complicated, too messy. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And for that I am truly, deeply sorry. It was a failure of character, both personal and professional. Her confession was more than I had anticipated. She wasn't just distancing herself from Jason. She was taking ownership of her own complicity. But I couldn't let her off the hook that easily. The judge in me, the part that seeks the root cause, had to ask. Why, Sophia? I asked, my voice quiet but piercing. I understand the awkwardness, but why choose to stay silent when you knew your fiancé was about to publicly humiliate a sitting judge in a room full of people? The question landed with the force of a physical blow. Her professional composure finally shattered. The lawyer disappeared, and all that was left was a woman confronting a truth about herself she clearly despised. Because I was ambitious, she choked out, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. Because I was so focused on the prize. I was about to marry into what I perceived as a powerful, successful family. Jason was a rising star in finance. His parents are well connected. I saw our future as a partnership, a consolidation of power. Rocking the boat, creating conflict with his family before the wedding, it seemed like a strategically poor decision. There it was, the cold, unvarnished, calculating truth. It wasn't about love or family or even feelings. It was about strategy. It was a cost-benefit analysis, a risk assessment. And in that moment, I understood her with a chilling clarity. I see, I said softly. The air in my chambers was thick with the fallout of her confession. She had laid her motivations bare, and they were as pragmatic and ruthless as any legal brief. She hadn't just been a bystander to my humiliation. She had been a silent co-conspirator, her silence bought by her own ambition. The eye of the storm had passed over me, and now it was sitting directly on top of her, forcing her to reckon with the wreckage of her own choices. The sound of the front door closing behind Sophia was a soft, final click that echoed the closing of a chapter in all our lives. For a long, stunned moment, nobody in my parents' living room moved or spoke. The 2-carat diamond ring on the coffee table seemed to pulse with a malevolent light, a tiny glittering tombstone for my brother's carefully constructed future. Jason was the first to break, but he didn't explode in a fresh wave of anger. He imploded. The rage and bluster drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow, slack-jawed shell of a man. He sank onto the expensive leather couch, his eyes fixed on the ring, his face pale and empty. He had lost. He had lost his fiancée. He had lost his status as the undisputed king. He had lost the argument, in the most public and humiliating way possible. And the finality of it all was written all over his face. My father, recovering from the initial shock, redirected his impotent fury toward the only available target, me. "Are you happy now?" he seethed, his voice trembling with rage. "Is this what you wanted? To come in here and tear this family to shreds? To destroy your brother's life?" I looked at him, at his contorted face, and felt a profound, weary sadness. The anger I had felt was gone, replaced by a deep exhaustion. "I didn't do this, Dad," I said, my voice tired but clear. "You all did. This family wasn't torn apart last night. It was built on a cracked foundation of lies and favoritism. It was bound to collapse sooner or later. All I did was stop trying to hold up the ceiling." My mother began to cry then, not the angry, frustrated tears of before, but soft, helpless sobs of genuine grief. "Emily, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Don't say that. Whatever our mistakes, we're your family." "Are you?" I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. A family is supposed to see you, to support you, to build you up. Not use you as a measuring stick to make someone else feel tall. Not ignore your entire life because it doesn't fit into their narrative. I looked at my parents, at their shocked, wounded faces, and I knew I had to leave before I said something I couldn't take back. "I need space," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I can't do this anymore. We all need some time." I turned to go. My father's voice, stripped of its usual authority, called after me. "Where are you going?" "Home," I said, without turning around. "To my real life, the one I built for myself." The days that followed were defined by an eerie, unnerving silence. No angry phone calls, no manipulative texts. It was as if a ceasefire had been called in a war I didn't even realize I had been fighting for so long. I knew they needed time to sift through the wreckage, and frankly, so did I. I buried myself in my work, finding a strange comfort in the clear-cut logic of the law. In my courtroom, things made sense. There were rules, evidence, precedents, consequences. Outside of it, there was only the messy, unpredictable chaos of human emotion. About a week later, my office phone rang. It was Sophia. Her voice was completely different from the emotional, conflicted woman who had sat in my chambers. The turmoil was gone, replaced by a calm, cool, professional efficiency. "Emily, it's Sophia," she said. "I apologize for calling you at your chambers, but I felt I owed you a final explanation." "You don't owe me anything, Sophia," I told her, sinking into my leather chair. "I believe I do," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I wanted to inform you that I have officially and formally ended the engagement. I've had a courier retrieve my personal belongings from the apartment, and I've arranged for the ring to be returned to Jason's parents." "I see," I said quietly. "And I want to be unequivocally clear. This is not a temporary separation or a cooling-off period. It is over." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and a part of me genuinely was. I had never intended to be the catalyst for their breakup. "Don't be," she said, and her voice was so devoid of sentiment, it was almost chilling. "And I need you to understand this, Emily. This was not ultimately an emotional decision. It was a professional one." I was taken aback by her frankness. "A professional one?" "Yes," she affirmed. "In my line of work, as in yours, reputation and judgment are paramount. They are our currency. My judgment in my choice of a life partner has been revealed to be deeply, fundamentally flawed. Being associated with Jason now, after his public display of cruelty and the subsequent revelations about his character, constitutes a significant and unacceptable reputational risk." She paused as if choosing her next words from a legal brief. "He has become a liability, and in my world, you cut liabilities. A risk, a liability." She was discussing the end of her relationship, the dissolution of a planned marriage, with the detached pragmatism of a CEO dissolving a failing subsidiary. I realized then that I hadn't just witnessed a breakup, I had witnessed a lawyer cutting her losses in the most ruthless way possible. It was brutal, it was cold, but it was also the most authentic thing she had said. She was, in her own way, a survivor. She had assessed the damage, calculated the potential for future losses, and made the only logical choice to protect her own interests. "I understand," I said quietly. "I thought you would," she replied. "Good luck, Judge, though I don't think you need it." There was a brief pause, and for a fleeting moment, a hint of warmth entered her voice. "You already have it." She hung up. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear. I felt a strange mixture of pity and respect for Sophia. We were two very different people from two different worlds, but we had both been trapped in the gravitational pull of my brother's ego. And we had both, in our own ways, managed to break free. The silence from my family stretched on. I had drawn a clear line in the sand, and I had no idea if they would ever be willing or able to cross it. The quiet in my life felt both liberating and profoundly lonely. I had won. I had reclaimed my dignity, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the cost of that victory might be the very family I had once promised to hold together. The first crack in the wall of silence appeared after 2 weeks. It wasn't a phone call, which would have been too confrontational, or a text, which would have been too casual. It was an email from my mother, arriving in my inbox late one Tuesday night. The subject line was just 2 words: "Thinking of you." I hesitated before opening it, bracing myself for accusations or guilt trips. But the email itself was short, tentative, almost shy. She didn't apologize. She didn't make excuses for Jason or my father. She simply asked a question. I was reading an article online about the judicial appointment process in our state. It seems very complicated. Pima? I was wondering if you could explain to me how it works sometime. If you're not too busy, of course. It was such a small thing, a simple question. But in the context of our family's history, it was monumental. It was the first time in my adult life that she had shown any genuine curiosity about my world, rather than trying to shoehorn me into hers. It was a tiny, fragile olive branch, extended across a chasm of misunderstanding. I stared at the words on the screen for a long time, my throat tightening. Then I wrote back a simple reply. I can explain it. How about dinner next week? My treat. That dinner was one of the most surreal and awkward meals I've ever eaten. It took place at a quiet, neutral Italian restaurant, a place with no history for us. It was just me and my parents. Jason's name hung in the air between us, a ghost at the table, but no one dared to speak it. My father, usually so boisterous and dominating, was subdued. He seemed to have shrunk. He studied the menu with an intensity it didn't deserve. His usual bluster was completely gone. My mother, on the other hand, tried to fill the silence, peppering me with questions about my job. They were clumsy, elementary questions, the kind a child might ask, but they were sincere. So, what kind of cases do you hear the most? Is it scary having to make such big decisions? Do you really get to use one of those little wooden hammers? It's called a gavel, Mom, I said, a small smile touching my lips for the first time. Patiently, I answered them all. I walked them through my journey, a story they were hearing for the first time. I told them about the grueling hours of law school, the high-pressure environment of the DA's office, the intense vetting process for a judicial appointment. I described the weight of the responsibility, the loneliness of the decisions, the moral and ethical tightrope I walked every single day. As I spoke, I watched their faces. I saw confusion give way to dawning understanding, then to something that looked like awe, and finally to a deep, unspoken shame. They weren't just learning about my career. They were meeting their daughter for the first time, and in doing so, they were being forced to confront the stranger they had lived with for 32 years. My father barely spoke, but he listened. His eyes never left my face. When the check came, he reached for it, but I put my hand over his. I said it was my treat, Dad. He just nodded, looking down at the table. Slowly, tentatively, like the first shoots of grass after a long winter, things began to change. A week after our dinner, my father forwarded me a link to a complex analysis of a recent Supreme Court decision from a legal journal. The email subject was simple. Saw this, thought of you. It was his way of saying, I'm trying to understand your world. My Aunt Caroline and Uncle Robert called me one Sunday afternoon. Their apology was a rambling, disjointed mess of excuses and regret. We're so sorry, Emily, Aunt Caroline said, her voice thick with emotion. We always followed your parents' lead. We took our cues from them. We never thought for ourselves, never bothered to look closer. There's no excuse for it. It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. The biggest shift, however, came from the one person I thought I might never speak to again. 6 months after the night that had blown our world apart, I received a text message. Can we get coffee, Jason? I agreed. My curiosity and a faint, flickering ember of sisterly affection overriding years of resentment. We met at a sterile, anonymous coffee shop, neutral ground far from our usual territories. He looked diminished. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The expensive, flashy suit was gone, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a gray sweater. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been banked, leaving behind a weary, uncertain flicker. We sat in an awkward silence for several minutes after our coffees arrived. He just stirred his, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the ceramic, a nervous tick. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. I've been, talking to someone, he said, the words coming out in a rush. A therapist. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, giving him the space to continue. She says I have issues, he said with a wry, humorless smile. A narcissistic personality complex with deep-seated insecurities, most likely fueled by intense parental pressure to be the best. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Sounds about right, doesn't it? He took a shaky breath, the bravado completely gone. I was an ass, Emily, my entire life. From the time we were kids, I've been a complete and utter ass to you. His voice cracked. I was so terrified, so scared, that if I wasn't the golden child, the big success story, then I was nothing. My whole identity, everything I thought made me, was built on the idea that I was better than you, more successful than you, more important than you. He looked down at his hands. When I found out the truth, that you weren't just successful, but that you were respected for your character, for your mind, in a way I never could be, it felt like my entire world was a lie, like I was the failure. He looked up again, his eyes glistening. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not because I got caught, not because I lost Sophia. I am sorry, because you are my sister, and I treated you like you were nothing. It wasn't a perfect Hollywood-style apology. It was clumsy, raw, still deeply rooted in his own pain. But it was the most honest, vulnerable thing he had ever said to me. In that moment, I thought, this isn't just my arrogant brother anymore. This is a man who's finally confronting what he's been running from his whole life. I saw past the bully, past the golden child. I saw Jason, the man, a man who had been just as trapped and damaged by our family's twisted dynamic as I had been. I appreciate you saying that, Jason, I said quietly, and I meant it. We started talking, really talking. It was halting and awkward. We were like two strangers trying to learn a language they had both forgotten. But it was a beginning. A few months later, as a symbol of our fragile new truce, my family insisted on hosting a small dinner to celebrate my official nomination for the position of presiding judge of the county court system. The dinner was at my parents' house. The atmosphere was still layered with a bit of tension, like a freshly healed wound that was still tender to the touch. My mother fussed too much over the food. My father was still a little too formal, addressing me with an almost comical level of deference. Jason was quiet, mostly listening, content to stay out of the spotlight. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were a family in the slow, painful process of repair. In the middle of dessert, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a text. It was a call from a restricted number, which in my world usually meant official business. I excused myself, stepping into the quiet hallway. It was the county sheriff on the line. "Judge," he said, his voice grim and professional. "Sorry to bother you at home, ma'am. We've had a situation tonight. A serious one. A multi-car accident. We're booking the suspect on a felony DUI charge." "Okay," I said, my mind immediately shifting into professional gear. "What's the suspect's name?" The sheriff hesitated for a beat too long. "Well, that's the thing, Judge. That's why I'm calling you directly. The suspect, it's your cousin, Jessica Matthews." The blood drained from my face. Jessica, my sweet, bubbly younger cousin. Caroline's daughter, the one who had always adored both me and Jason. I walked back into the dining room, my face a pale mask. They all stopped talking, their tentative smiles vanishing as they saw my expression. "Emily, what is it?" my mother asked, her voice laced with a new kind of fear. "What's wrong?" I looked at my family, at this fragile new piece we had so painstakingly built, and I knew, with a sinking heart, that it was about to face its first, and perhaps its greatest, test. The news fell like a bomb into the quiet, carefully reconstructed atmosphere of the dining room. Jessica, arrested for a felony DUI. The implications were immediate and catastrophic. My Aunt Caroline would be devastated. The family name would be in the papers. My father, reacting with the instincts of a lifetime, immediately went into damage control mode. "Okay, first thing tomorrow," he said, rising from his seat, his voice taking on a familiar, commanding tone. "We get her the best defense lawyer in the state. We need to handle this quietly. Keep it out of the press." My mother was already flitting about the potential social fallout. "Oh my word, what will people say? Caroline will be mortified. Jessica's only 24. They were falling back into their old patterns, immediate concerns focused on appearances, containment, and leveraging influence. I stood there, the phone still warm in my hand, and I felt the collective weight of their expectations shift and settle squarely onto my shoulders. Every eye in the room was on me. But they weren't looking at Emily, the daughter, the sister, the cousin. They were looking at Judge Matthews. They saw a solution, a connection, a shortcut, a way to make this terrible, messy problem go away. I could feel the unspoken plea in the air. "Help us, Emily. Fix this, for the family." The pressure was immense. A familiar phantom from my past whispering, "Be the glue, one more time." And then Jason did something that proved beyond any doubt that his change was real. He stood up slowly from his chair, pushed it back, and walked over to where I was standing. He didn't look at our parents or our aunt and uncle. He looked directly at me. He put a firm, steadying hand on my shoulder. "Do what you have to do," he said, his voice quiet but resolute, meant for my ears alone. Then he turned to the room and spoke louder. "Judge," he said. He called me Judge. It wasn't the disbelieving, spat-out word from the engagement party. It wasn't a revelation or a surprise. It was a title. It was an acknowledgement of my role, my duty, a responsibility that I held, one that superseded our family ties. In that single respectful word, I saw the true measure of his journey. He was finally seeing beyond himself, beyond the family's insular world. He was seeing me, and the burden I carried. My father started to protest. "Now, Jason, this is family." "No, Dad," Jason cut him off, his voice firm. "Stop. This is her world. These are her rules. We need to respect that." I looked around the table at my family, their faces a chaotic mix of fear, hope, and confusion. And in that moment, a profound and liberating realization washed over me. For 10 long years, I had yearned for their approval. I had believed that their recognition of my success was the prize I needed to win. But it wasn't. The real victory wasn't the moment they learned I was a judge. The real victory was this moment, right now. The moment I realized their approval, while welcome, was no longer necessary for my sense of self-worth. My value wasn't something they could bestow upon me or take away. It was something I had forged myself in the quiet solitude of my office, in the lonely weight of my decisions, in the integrity I fought to maintain every single day. I would handle Jessica's case as the law demanded. I would immediately and formally recuse myself from presiding over it, citing conflict of interest. I would ensure it was assigned to another judge, randomly and by the book. I would offer my family emotional support, but I would not, could not, interfere with the course of justice. They might not understand. My aunt might feel betrayed. My parents might be disappointed. But for the first time in my life, that was okay. They would have to learn to live with it. Because I had finally learned to live with myself. The glue that held our family together was no longer a promise made out of a young girl's sense of duty. It was a new, fragile, and infinitely more powerful bond. And respect. A respect built on the hard, unforgiving ground of truth. And it would have to be strong enough to withstand the righteous weight of justice.